Hello, everybody. Robert Rose here, the Chief Strategy Advisor with the Content Marketing Institute. And I'm super excited to bring you this short chat that we're calling Meeting in the Middle, Why Brands Need to Listen to Connect. This video is sponsored by Pan Communications, and it features their new research, the Brand Experience Report. It analyzes the relationships and gaps between how brands choose to tell their stories and how customers understand them. To talk about that, I was pleased to be able to sit down and speak with Mark Nardoni, the Chief Marketing Officer leading Pan Communications' strategic growth initiatives. Mark and I have been friends for a long time, and in this interview, we get to dive into just a few of the insights from the research report and talk a bit about where brand, content, and digital experiences are all going in 2023. I truly hope you enjoy this interview with my friend, Mark Nardoni. First of all, Mark, great to see you. How are you doing? Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you as well. It's great to see you. It's been a little bit, but I always enjoy our conversation. So thanks.
Yeah, it's always great. It's always great to connect. So let's just jump right into it since time is short. One of the things that we have noticed, and I would love to get your initial take on here, is that, and we were talking even a little bit about this in the pre-show warm-up, which is that brands today, it seems like storytelling is becoming just ever more important in the world of marketing. I mean, it's certainly something we inside baseball folks have been doing for some time, but it seems like now brands are living and dying by their story. And the research really showed this, where you found that 38% of marketers are saying that their brand efforts are failing, quite honestly, due to weak messaging, positioning, and quite honestly, storytelling, and that we're really struggling to find this brand story and trying to find these meaningful connections with audiences. So what, from your lens that you're looking through every day, are you finding that this inherently transactional relationship in marketing is something that's evolving, or how do we have this responsibility to get deeper into storytelling, or what, from a storytelling perspective, are you seeing as an evolution in 2023?
Yeah, it's interesting that you pulled that stat specifically out. So a few things. Brands, I think, are still playing the pace game, Robert. They kind of like are putting out the content after content, not sure they're doing enough to listen to if that content is actually landing. We've had the triggers in past, right? To gate or not to gate. You and I have talked about that several times based on content and the performance of content. But the word you used is evolve. And I kind of like to look at it that way as well, right? Because even if you're a brand and you're a marketer and you're sitting there and, the spirit behind why we did the experience report was all about, we knew there was a gap. We knew that brands had this kind of way about going, about their business, telling their story, but not sure they were slowing down enough to listen to that ultimate customer consumer, right? Whether that is through external research, whether that is through their own internal due diligence, right? With their existing customer base and kind of how are they tapping into that. And we found that, there's just, as you imagine, there's so much change that's taking place with your target audience nowadays. There's a lot of noise surrounding them. There's a lot of distractions. And brands nowadays, they can't be robotic with the way they go about telling their story. They've got to be really authentic. They've got to understand how and why it lands. And if it doesn't land, how do they continue to evolve it so that it does land? So it kind of gets to the point of, you got to move the audience beyond the transaction. They just can't be a number because they purchased something. There's got to be more meaning behind why you are engaging with your consumer and your audience in the first place. And I think if marketers and brands could look at it that way, they'll probably have much more success at kind of seeing that story resonate more and more and continue to grow.
It's funny, just right on your point, one of the things that I often find with the companies that we work with is marketers can tend, and this includes marketers, sales enablement, salespeople, account services, sort of the customer facing managers out there. What they tend to do is look at the marketing as what's new and shiny and brand new from a messaging perspective, to the point where we may find some cool, interesting story, but we're so latched onto this idea of what do we need today? What do we need today? What do we need today in this transaction focused world that we often let great stories just slip away because it's not new, right? And instead, one of the things is we've been talking to these brands about slowing down the content creation process, the process that everybody feels needs to be exponentially faster, but actually purposely slowing it down so that you can exponentially speed up the distribution and the talk of the story. It feels like once we get a story, we should probably just hang on to it a little longer, don't you think?
100%. I think that, agility could be a good word and a bad word, right? Agility means, you're listening to the experience side of the content. I think that's kind of one of the areas you're kind of leaning into right now, right? It's like there's great stories that are flying by, but why are you not spending time on that story to make sure it's percolating the way that you want it to percolate? You know what I mean? It's kind of like, you get to that, story has to, I go back to, it has to continue to evolve. Evolve doesn't mean change. Right. Evolve just means kind of like to build upon, or just, there's so many other elements that go inside of that. And we just consistently emphasize, the quality versus quantity play. And, if you're really producing great content that's landing, even if it's not landing, quality, spend time with it. Like, spend time with it. Don't move to the next thing so quickly.
Yeah. It segues into another great topic that I'd love to get your take on, which is this, how often we miss them, right? How often because we're not, maybe too agile, if that's the right way to phrase it, or moving too quickly, we often miss where the audience actually is. And the research that you put out, found that almost 42% of the marketers believe that this thought leadership, this idea of, creating differentiating stories is the most effective means of communicating. But almost a third of consumers are learning about brands from people that they know. In other words, we're not finding them very effectively right now and having them discover these wonderful pieces of content or thought leadership that we want. And when you think about distribution, like when you start thinking about the distributing of content, that this wonderful story that we've spent so much time creating, how do we make this case where, first of all, starting to see them as people that have needs and actually leading thought, but making really a strategy about the giving without getting, right? Giving this thought leadership without necessarily getting. Is that just a measurement thing, or is it something that we need to change fundamentally in our distribution strategy? Or what's the right way to look through that lens these days?
Yeah. Great point. I feel like what we're seeing is, this is going to be no surprise to you, community starting to kind of bubble up more and more now, right? It was the thing in the past. Now it went down a little bit. Now it's coming back around. And, it's like there's the human and people side of the story that's got to be able to land. But if you're not sitting inside a community of like interests and values and, purposeful, thoughts or whatever else we want to kind of tag onto that, you're almost missing, the importance of how to start to kind of build community from the ground up. And it's like, you and I could think about it from, that's advocacy. Well, sure, it's advocacy, but if I want to make sure, if I'm in a CMO thread and I'm kind of interested in, how people are doing certain things on demand gen, lead gen, and all that kind of stuff, and I'm in a community, well, I want to see their opinions on certain topics because that's my interest. Yeah. Now, when brands move out to market a little bit more, I think consumers have done a nice job building community. You think about everything that's happened with the products that probably we wear today, whether it's, Nike or whatever else it happens to be. We go there. I'm part of like a hydro rowing community. That's community. It's great. It's like, I've started to take up rowing, and I communicate with other rowers just because it's something that I'm very interested in. You flip that to the B2B side, becomes a little bit more complicated. You've got some of these brands that are building their communities, their branded communities, and or they're moving their audiences to other communities that are already out there and established via LinkedIn or whatever else that's going on. And sometimes, communities can really help on the brand awareness side, because once those topics start flowing and you see the energy and you see the authenticity sitting inside of the community, you got to let that go as a brand. You got to be able to lean in and respond, but you got to let it go, because that's just going to be some magic that goes on in there. And you should be in tune enough to lift some of that magic out of community and flip it into your content strategy. because you go back to what we were talking about in the previous conversation, the experience. Well, the experience is brewing big time inside a community.
Yeah. It's like that. Chris Brogan has that wonderful quote that I love so much, where he says, you know, the difference between an audience and a community is which way the chairs are facing.
Yeah.
And it really gets to what you're talking about here, which is today, the modern idea of community here is that co-creation, right? We get so wrapped up sometimes in being like, we have to be the smartest one in the room, and we have to be sort of the one to prove out the thought leadership that's actually visionary and all that stuff. And what we realize is that participating in that community, that lively discussion and co-creating some of those things can be just much more effective.
It's so true. And, you know, here comes we could call it an opportunity or a threat. But right. Here comes AI inside of content, right? You've got ChatGPT bubbling up now, and you're like, okay, so now are brands going to go back to pace and lose that awesome moment that they have to truly connect with people inside a community because they just want to, you know, how is that whole AI and content and process going to take place? And how do you use ChatGPT right now as a marketer and a brand? Do you use it as an ideation tool? Or do you use it as an authentic tool? And that debate is going to continue to kind of live and breathe. And you can see it taking place, Robert, right? Over the last 3, 4, 5 months, man, it's like, it's a rocket ship. And I think marketers and brands are faced with some significant challenges on that front.
Yeah, they absolutely are. I mean, it's funny that we so often talk about ChatGPT as a thing that's fundamentally changing marketing, but it's also really changing the idea of the buying process too, right? The content creation process from the buyer's perspective as well. Last thing that I want to ask you about is, so one of the research, and it goes right along with what we're talking about, which is the 55% of customers said the research said that they will thoroughly research a brand before buying from it. And I think that fits right in line with what we've seen from other research reports about how much of the buying journey is done alone through buying committees, through the idea of research and everything that's going on. But how, when you're dealing with a community of, you know, an audience that you're trying to engage and really pull that engagement forward, what's the key in that for us as the creator of content that is ultimately supposed to drive a customer sale? What's our role, right? What's our role as the brand in that, as we start looking at making our brand the leader in that community, or making our brand the go-to solution in that? Is there one thing that we can, you know, sort of take action on Monday morning?
Trust. I think that, you know, nowadays there's just a lot of information. There's a lot of information flying back at your audiences that you're targeting. There's a lot of distractions as well. If I'm going on a journey with a brand and I'm at the early stages of evaluating that brand, how are they educating me on if it's the right product or service that I should be looking at, evaluating, and ultimately buying? And I think, you know, very, very closely to that is then authenticity and reputation. It's like, what's the reputation of the brand? And, you know, how do I focus on that as a brand marketer, and how do I better connect with the customer to earn their trust? You know, it doesn't always have to start off with, we talked about this in the first question, it doesn't always have to start off with the transaction. It can just start with a feeling, an emotion. You know, it's like, you've addressed something with me. You're not asking me for money yet, but my God, you're earning my communication and my collaboration with you as a potential brand. And in that experience report, we still found there was gaps there. Like and maybe it's just a lot to do what's happened, you know, when the pandemic took place and we've moved beyond it. But I think consumers are far more knowledgeable. They have a lot more access. They've got a pair of networks that they trust because they're either friends or they're business associates that they share, and they can come to a conclusion a lot quicker, which is a scary thing for brands, but it's an awesome opportunity for them as well, right? I mean, they could sit back and be like, you know, they can live on the transactional wheel, but do they really want to? Or they want to look at the customer lifetime value that they're going to get out of doing business with me or with whoever else they're trying to sell to, and ultimately build loyalty and engage with on an advocacy side of things. Those are some big objectives there.
Yeah. Well, it's a great place for us to sort of and this, which is the trust. I love it so much. The first one to deliver trusted value is the one who's going to win. So, Mark, thank you for this. This is extraordinary, as always. It's such a joy to talk to you every year, to sort of tee up the year and see what we're going to be thinking about this year. By the way, for everybody out there, the brand experience report research is going to be made available. So it's a great read, some fantastic insight in there. Mark, thank you so very much for this. And for all of you, just remember out there, it is your story. Tell it well. I'm Robert Rose with the Content Marketing Institute, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Robert.